For me, it's sometimes doing things that are unpopular or misunderstood for your own greater good. And I don't even mean for that to rhyme, but it does. You have to do what makes sense for you. And I feel like I haven't always done things that other people have agreed with, or maybe the suggested, I don't know, the road less traveled. But I feel like really just like knowing what that means for you and really just standing strong in that.
Welcome, queer kittens, to Quest, a journey to wellness. I'm V, a two-spirit human, joy influencer, energy worker, and dad joke connoisseur. All pronouns accepted. Our mission with this podcast is to help queer folks find radical acceptance through loving themselves and others in their community. You'll hear stories from folks who have taken their happiness and well-being into their own hands by examining what they've found helpful along the way. We hope this podcast brings you joy where you'll learn, laugh, heal, and grow. Welcome, queer kittens, and welcome, new earballs. Today, we're going to be chatting a little bit about gut health. It's something that we all don't talk about enough. I think that we're very much about the spiritual, the physical, like going to the gym and, writing and like that kind of self-care. But I don't think we talk about gut health, self-care enough. And all of those other things come into play through our gut health, and we don't even realize it. So today we're going to be talking with C. Savage Chambers. He's a Creole, Southern-born 80s baby, plant-based wellness coach, a chef, an educator, a creator, a poet, a community organizer, and the founder of Higher Wellness. The way I met this guy is actually kind of magical. The first year of Some of Us Fest in person, he was one of the food vendors, and I was just magnetized to his energy. And I was just like, who is this guy? First off, he's cooking in some fly clothes. I would be nervous to get some like fly clothes dirty when cooking because, it gets messy in the kitchen. And no matter how many people were in that line, he kept it calm. He kept it cool, big old smile on his face. And I was like, who is this guy? And I got to talking to him, and he was not only like suave and cool, but spiritual. And like he connected like the gut health with the spirituality. And it was just like, wait a minute, what? I need to know more. I need to know more. And then found out he was my neighbor. So I was just like, the universe just put this guy in front of me. This is somebody you're going to learn some stuff from. This is a solid human, and I can't wait for y'all to hear more from him. So without further ado, here is Mr. Chambers.
I'm C. Savage Chambers. I use he, him pronouns. I identify as a poly, hetero, queer trans man. And a fun fact about me, Wizard of Oz is probably one of my all-time favorite movies. And Charlie Brown.
Hey, can you do the Charlie Brown?
I probably could.
Why is Wizard of Oz one of your favorite movies?
I think just that whole, what's home mean? Dorothy trying to find home, and like this whole like journey that she's going on as far as like the Yellow Brick Road, and having to incorporate heart, courage, all those things I felt like just resonated with me as a kid for whatever reason. And I feel like even into adulthood, it just makes sense. For me, I'm always thinking about where I'm going, but I remember where I've been.
I'm a little curious now. I want to know where you've been. I want to know a little bit about Lil C. Savage.
I wouldn't say like crazy well-traveled, but I mean, domestically, because I was an athlete growing up, I traveled a lot for AAU basketball. So, I mean, I've gotten to play basketball a lot of different places. Then I also got to travel internationally. So like my favorite places. I got to go to Paris, Amsterdam, and I got to spend a day in Norway, which was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
So those are just like little breadcrumbs, but I feel like everywhere I go, just having to show up as myself or just be who I am in these spaces. Like I always feel like I look like I'm not from here, but wherever I'm at, I feel like people are always just kind of like, you're not from here. Huh? I'm like, no, I'm not.
It's because it's all that swag. You're always styling and just like shining bright over there.
I thank my ancestors for that.
And the work you've done. I know when I see somebody that shines the way that you do, I always have a mindset that you've been through some hard shit. You're going through some hard shit. And you doing the work you can to thrive through that.
That's real. And I think maybe that's one of the things I maybe don't give myself enough credit for is the things that I've been through, but really just how like I've overcome it and to like be here. And I don't know, I guess that's where like imposter syndrome kicks in sometimes. I'm just like, wait, on paper, this looks and sounds pretty good. Why am I being so hard on myself? But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And those are the moments that, like you said earlier, is looking back where you were and then being like, oh shit, I'm good where I'm at right now.
Exactly. It's like, dang, like I waited so long to get this far. I mean, I remember the first time even just thinking about, oh, I want a beard and just being like so frustrated. And now, I mean, dang, like this thing, as I shave it, it's coming back.
Right. Look at that. Let me see that. Ooh. Oh.
Right.
I know you and I have had our own personal talks about some different things we've gone through. And I wanted to ask you, like, was there ever a moment in your life that like sparked that wellness journey for you?
I think the initial thing that really sparked it for me, in all honesty, early on was right early on after I got married. I was about 22 years old. I started having an eating disorder. Like I was no longer an athlete. So I had like a change of identity. I'm now newly married, but my partner at the time also had a kid. So like I'm a new step parent stepping into this role. I got really, really sick. I think I was always worried about maybe gaining weight after being an athlete. So I think I was like hyper focused on that to a point. But I think just all of these unhealthy habits and work just kind of caught up with me. And it was finally like when I went to the doctor and I was having all these like gut issues and really them actually saying like, you have anorexia, like you have an eating disorder.
Wow.
And like that kind of like setting in, I think was like the catalyst and the turning point. And that was also when I had to like be real with like, why am I doing this? Or like, why am I starving myself to a point, or like not wanting to eat, or this fear of like losing weight? And it was just like, I didn't want to have like big hips. All my family is like from the South and real voluptuous women. So I think like in my mind, I really had that internalized as far as what that weight could potentially look like, no longer being an athlete. But I actually have a really high metabolism. My body actually doesn't even metabolize fat. So it's one of those things where I was also not feeding myself, but I also wasn't giving my body the actual nutrients and the things that it needed. So with that, fast forward, my doctor put me on like not a restrictive diet, but it was an elimination diet to kind of figure out what some of those triggers and things were in my gut to kind of find like the root of the issue. When I started reintroducing food, that's when I started to recognize how certain things were like making me feel. And then like nutrition wise, just starting to be more conscious. And then at that point, I was 123 pounds at 5'10".
Oh my goodness.
You could see my ribs through my back. My eyes were like super sunken in. Like it was really, really bad. Like looking at like even my ID photo, when I look back, I'm just like, bro, like, you look like Jack Skeleton or something. Like what was going on? But getting back into the gym, and once I started doing that and getting into that routine, But I think I still struggled because I couldn't put on weight, so to speak. But that was really just kind of like the catalyst as far as like change, and then starting to like research information. And unfortunately, being really cheap, not being able to afford like a personal trainer or like somebody's like workout program, that's when I really started like reading a lot of information for myself and just started like educating myself about like health and wellness. And I started just kind of being like, wait a minute, some of this stuff, I was like, I don't know, what I've been doing all along has been right.
Yeah. And then
So I just had to reevaluate.
And that's what like kind of maybe sparked you wanting to share all of this information and starting your business?
That was probably like one of the first points, at least as far as like my personal journey, as far as health. When I kind of took that step as far as starting to educate myself at that point, then just trying to get more activity in my life since I wasn't like a athlete anymore. And I actually ended up joining the amateur softball team with the San Francisco Gay Softball League. And it actually ended up being like a trans softball team with a bunch of other trans guys. And at the time I wasn't on hormones. So it's like I newly into the gym, starting to get this activity, whatever else. But then I started to be around all these other guys that were actively on hormones and I wasn't. So it was kind of like a combination of those things kind of coming together. And then now I'm hitting the gym even harder because I'm trying to bulk up and get bigger. I'm not getting certain types of results. And then I ended up finding my health coaching program. And then that was really what catapulted me forward. And that was maybe like around 2018. Finding out about the health issues that I personally had was kind of like the catalyst for that self journey. But that self journey is kind of what led me to other people need this information. And I feel like other people are probably also suffering in silence and not saying anything. Or just seeing people that I was close to or that I cared about get sick or ultimately start passing away really young is when it really just started becoming like more important, where I was like, this isn't something that you can wait on.
Can you tell me more about how you were feeling before being plant-based in your body?
Well, I feel like there would definitely be noticeable changes, I feel like, in honestly, like my brain function. Like I started noticeably feeling the differences as far as how I would think, what my thoughts were, whether that was like certain depression and anxiety or like even just fatigue, or like I said, just general like brain fog, cloudiness of judgment. I would honestly feel like I felt almost dubbed down to a certain point where it's like I couldn't like retain certain things or even like my attention span. I used to have what I would always call in the office, like cubicle bureaucratic environment. Like they'd always come around with donuts. And like, I promise you by 2:00, like nothing is getting done in that office. Everybody is barely hanging on. We're walking around. We're trying to stay awake at that point, or, you know what I'm saying? Continuing to function. But it's just like the processing of things was just like so much slower. So just recognizing that, the irritation in like my gut, my bowel movements, like understanding the differences in my stool, the differences in my skin. I never, thank God, really had to experience like a lot of acne, but I always know when I'm not eating right, or that's like tall tales, like I'll start breaking out in my face, or if I've had too much sugar, recognizing like how swollen certain parts of my body would be. Like my hands would get swollen, or if I fall asleep with rings on and like all of a sudden, like I can't pull them off the next day. I'm just like, dang, like I've had like way too much salt in my diet. I'm just starting to recognize like certain things, how late I'm eating before bed, which doesn't necessarily affect me just based on the frequency of my meals. I also practice a lot of like intermittent fasting. So I pay attention to the increments, or when's the last time I ate, or when's the last time I had that particular item, if it's something that I know could potentially trigger a certain reaction, like cheese, that dairy or otherwise, and just recognizing some of those things. My hair, there was like a time frame where I like noticeably, I was starting to like lose my hair, like my locks were like thinning. And also just recognizing the change in my diet. And that actually happened shortly after I went plant-based. But that was when I recognized that I was having like a loss of certain like nutrients or proteins and like healthy fats that I now was no longer quote unquote getting because I wasn't eating meat. or some of those things.
I have a funny question to ask you. Not funny. I think that some people might find it funny, but during my plant based era, this was like quarantine, and I was meditating all the time. I wasn't like focused on the outside world. So I was like disciplined about it every day. That I got to the point that when I started eating meat again, I felt like I was eating the emotions of the animals, that I was taking on the animals' emotions. And I was just like, oh no, like all those things that you explained of feeling like loss of thought, feeling super depressed, feeling physically stuck. It was insane how instant it was that I absorbed these emotions. And it was from eating
Yeah.
meat.
I always like to say you are what your food eats.
Honestly. And so it was
That can definitely be intense, especially as like you're thinking about what the last stages of like the animal's life was before it ended up on your plate, and you're literally ingesting all of that toxicity and stress hormone.
yeah.
Like you are putting it back into your body. Even like, as far as like the energy exchange, that was definitely one of those things that I also became conscious of. And I think when it comes to like making those choices and saying no, that's what also just made it easier. It's just like not only like physically, like I actually feel better when I practice these things and when I'm disciplined in this way, but even just like energetic, emotionally, like I feel better knowing that I said no, or I was true to myself, or I honored those boundaries in that respect.
Yeah. And you mentioned about being a trans man and dealing with food prior to hormones or before hormones. Was there a different change in terms of like what you were eating before hormones or after?
I definitely ate more after hormones. Like my appetite like increased more, and just like my ability to. But I feel like the way I understood my body as far as it just being a machine, I feel like I just understood it more. Like I feel like anything that I put in, like I felt that. And I felt like when I made the choice to go on hormones, that was when I made the choice to get off of like, I was on like antidepressants and other anxiety medications and things at the time too, which I think also were interacting with the food and also played a role. And I think that was one of the things that I had also told myself, if I'm going to undergo being on hormones, I don't want anything else to be interfering with that. So like I stopped smoking cigarettes because I didn't want that to interfere with like my potential for top surgery and things like that. So I think just like my level of consciousness and then actively changing those habits, it just became more important because I knew I was already playing with hormones and potentially taking years off of my life. I didn't want to add to that with anything else.
Yeah.
So it just became more important, more of a focal point.
Wow. Yeah. And you mentioned that like certain foods were exacerbating like the antidepressant stuff and the anxiety things. Do you have any foods that you can share, or is it kind of like bio based? Is it based off of like per person and how your body regulates those foods, or is it kind of like everyone?
I mean, I definitely think that there's some bio individuality to how certain foods affect you. So I'll say like pay attention to that. Just because it's affecting me doesn't mean that it's not necessarily going to affect you or vice versa. I feel like for me, certain things that I enjoyed, like coffee, sugar, obviously there's like caffeine, high processed foods. I love potato chips, Oreos, hot Cheetos, like eating those things before bed. I had to recognize how those things were actually not serving me because they have like no nutritional value. And then the reason why I was eating them generally because I was bored or just whatever time. So I think when I started to like cook for myself, when I started to actively engage in going shopping, which initially it was one of those things where I didn't necessarily participate in just based on certain roles within my prior marriage. So it was like when I started to be more active and like I said, like engage, educate myself, advocate for myself, so to speak, that's when those things really just kind of started to click.
Nice, nice. Also, too, it clicked in my head. I was like, wait a minute. You said you're from the South. You not only transitioned, you also went plant-based. How in the world does that dynamic work for how did you do what you do and be who
It's
you
hard.
are?
I mean, in all honesty, I feel like I've had, and I can't say like random or strange events. I just feel like I've had a lot of shit happen to me that has really, like you said, literally caused me to be who I am. But I don't feel like it's coincidence, because even though some of those difficult or like really shitty things happened, now that it got me here, I'm like, this makes sense. This is who I'm supposed to be, or I am supposed to be, I don't know, educating and having a certain amount of like outreach and engagement with people. But I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to say because there's so many things.
Yeah.
Like it's hard to almost know where to start. After my divorce, I mean, I had to cook my own food, and I've always been a foodie. I've enjoyed like high quality food, bougie food. So I had to learn how to make those things for myself. But in all honesty, like once I started getting in the kitchen for myself, that's when I started feeling like my ancestors were speaking to me and like put a little bit of this, or just really just reminiscing of like certain memories and like nostalgia. And it's like a certain energy that just kind of comes over me where I, in all honesty, more often than not, because I'm self-trained in cooking, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. But when I get in there, it's like it just comes over me and I just start doing stuff. And it's just like magic. It just happens.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of that is just based off of memories and times that I spent in the kitchen with my grandparents. I was always around adults when I was younger because I'm like the oldest of 30 something odd grandchildren on like my paternal side. So I was by myself a lot early on and just being around adults. So I feel like I just kind of was a sponge. I just took all those things on, recognizing now that I'm also like neurodivergent.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm just soaking these things in, a little savant to really just tap into later on. And I feel like I've had like a lot of these sort of gifts that have been instilled in me that I just, now I tap into them and I know what that's about.
That's awesome. So they respect all the choices of plant-based and your transition.
I mean, I feel like they respect it now. I mean, they see what I look like and they see my lifestyle, you know what I'm saying? So I think it's making more sense to them now. I don't feel like they fully get it. Like I still get a lot of jokes, you know, they're just like, oh, that rabbit food or salad or whatever. Like, what am I going to feed you kind of thing?
Oh.
Like, I think I really only have like one aunt that's like really on board, like full support. Like I can go to her house, stay and functionally feel okay with like what's in the fridge and not have to like full on go grocery shopping. So I feel like it's still just like an adjustment. But I think once I start integrating certain things, I don't know, certain plant-based hacks, it's easier for people to understand. And they're like, oh, it's not so bad.
Yeah, my family's the same way. They're very much, you're on vacation. Don't worry about eating like that. You just eat whatever. I'm just like, no.
Exactly. And I don't know. And at a certain cost, like some of it is like almost like quality. And I try not to offend anybody by that. But I'm just like, oh, I like what I like.
Yeah.
Or let me just get in there and make it.
Yeah, right.
Like I don't mind.
What are some of these like these hacks that you do?
Some of my favorites, because I love sweets. Like, so even like, especially like in baking, like if I'm not going to use like an egg substitute, bananas is a great substitute, obviously for the sweetness, but also like applesauce. Avocado is actually a great. Also, it's good because avocado has good fat content and you also don't really taste it. So just as far as like baking, integrating things like that, not using like regular white sugars, trying to use like honeys or agaves, fresh fruit, things that are like naturally sweet. Those are like some of my keys, because I think initially when I had to start eliminating foods, processed foods, and like some of my favorite snacks, that was the biggest thing. But recognizing how much sugar was in those foods and then recognizing how those things affect me, like brain fog or just fatigue over time. And then even in small amounts, if it's in everything that you eat, it's no longer a small amount. So it's like I kind of had to remove some of the fluff of what you're hearing that might be healthy or what's okay or what's good for you, and literally just start actually listening to my body and listening to myself.
What were you feeling when you weren't plant-based, and then when you became plant-based? Walk us through like what you were feeling in your body.
I was like almost like skinny fat and like bloated, or like constantly have heartburn, like chest ache, like literally my body would feel inflamed. I would like look at some of my pictures, and even though like I was like skinnier and healthy, like you can still like see like dark circle. Like I'm taking all of it in, like I'm wearing it. I've always been kind of like lactose intolerant, give or take. So milk wasn't always a huge thing, but I've always loved cheese. But when I started like cutting back on like the amounts of cheese, or like I said, like the quality and the kinds of cheese, and I'm just like I'm not going to the bathroom as often, or like it's not as difficult, or I don't know, even things, just being open about it, like things like constipation, like are you going or are you not, or how often are you going? That was really just kind of like the key and the frequency. And at one point, I would be in the bathroom 5 to like 7 times a day, like literally every hour. So when I started recognizing like the frequency of that, like going down, then I know that what my body is eating, I'm actually retaining. Like I'm not getting rid of it as waste. So I'm eating better things. So it was just like over time, recognizing the quality of foods. And I'm just like, okay, these things are good. When I got divorced from my partner, I was living in the San Francisco Peninsula, and then I moved over to the East Bay, and I was living off of like Seminary, not far from Mills, but in other words, East Oakland. I didn't have access to like the same healthy foods and things. The only thing that I knew was like back in college, I had a professor that used to always talk about the Berkeley Bowl, and she drank kombucha and all this like weird stuff. And I was just like, oh my God. And I knew in my studies that they had talked about the Berkeley Bowl and like how vast it was as far as like a grocery store and what you could get there. I feel like one of my first trips when I went there and like really just like grocery shopping as far as the options, and then recognizing, I'm like, oh, it's coming from this farm, or they're growing it in this place. That really just kind of started to change things for me. So I'm just like, dang, when I'm eating foods from there, I feel better versus when I'm buying it from whatever local food grocery store, or I don't know. I don't even want to give them any clout because they're horrible, except for their gas points.
How long did it take for you to like start feeling better once you removed all that stuff?
I mean, literally, it was almost like immediate. Like I really started noticing the changes like within days and weeks of time. Like it's pretty immediate, like enough to where I was like, why would I keep doing this other stuff? So that's why I was just like, I definitely still ate meat and was like transitioning out of it. But it was one of those things where, like I said, I was so focused on the quality, I was balancing it out, and it still worked for me at the time. What actually made me stop eating animals altogether was coming back from one of my softball tournaments. We were coming back from San Diego, and I saw, like in the pouring rain, you see this chicken truck, and you see all these chickens like in their cages, and it's like pouring rain. And oh my God, like just the sight was just like horrible. And I'm driving past it, and you see the famous F&F, you know whose that is, truck. And I just knew, I was just like, this is about to be on my dinner table or in whatever. And that was kind of just like, I don't know, just seeing the conditions that like the animals and things were in. Like the next time I had like a thing of chicken and waffles on my plate, I was like, I can't even eat this. I just didn't feel the same. And it really just started just more of a conscious choice where like, I don't need it and I don't want it, and my body is okay without it. Recognizing that I still do need certain amounts of fat, which is why I lean more towards like a vegetarian more than like a vegan diet, and a lacto-ovo. Like I'll still eat eggs periodically just because my body needs that supplement for the fat. But you can get that in like nuts and seeds. There's like other grains that you can eat. So finding things that you enjoy eating, and also just knowing how to like supplement some of those things. So it wasn't necessarily like I was missing out on it. It was just knowing, okay, well, I can trade this for that, and I'm still satisfied or feeling
Yeah.
satiated, not feeling like I'm missing out.
What would you say is like your like top 5 substitutes that would improve like gut health?
As a snack, like even just like fermented like veggies and like pickled things as like a probiotic, even if you're not like buying like yogurt, probiotic yogurts and things like that. I really enjoy that and fermenting like my own different veggies. I could eat anything from like onions and radishes, okra, beets, and then just having like a plethora of those and just eating them raw. Like it's really good for your gut health. Incorporating nuts and seeds in like all of my salads, or always having avocado just for like the healthy fat. Those are always been good ones for me. And then I'm just a huge oat milk and coconut milk fan. Like I feel like those are very versatile for anything where you don't need an animal's milk. So if I'm looking at certain products that are also plant-based, I look for them to also include either like oats or coconut, because they can also have like palm oil or a lot of other processed oils and things, which just because it's plant-based doesn't mean that it's any more healthier for you. So just paying attention to certain things like that, knowing how my body responds to those ingredients, that is just better for me.
Do you offer any cooking classes or like accessibility to recipes?
So I'm actually working on a plant-based recipe book, which is like some of my favorites that I enjoy making. It's a rhymes and recipes book. It's actually incorporating some of my poetry as well, because I've recognized what an emotional eater I am. So yes, I will have some recipes that are available. And then just in general, if I'm doing like one-on-one coaching or if I'm hosting workshops, then I do try to make that accessible, or if people are asking me. I've done a lot of guest speaking events in the past. So that's one of those things that I've started to incorporate as I kind of bring food along, or I'm talking about it, at least just try to make those samples available.
We talked about all the good like substitutes. I'm on my own food journey, and I think that I really would like to know things I should eliminate. I'm sure some of the listeners would like to know too, not only for the holidays, but just in life. Like, what is good to eliminate? Like, what is making me sick? Because I got them dark circles.
Honestly, I feel like it's so easy because we're constantly on the go. Like things like energy drinks, done. It doesn't matter like what kind of energy drink. And I think things that are obviously just like loaded with caffeine, which I think to a certain point can have benefits for some people. I think you just have to recognize how it affects you. And then also just recognizing anything in large amounts is like too much. So like for instance, even like with coffee, I do well with coffee as far as being neurodivergent. It really does help me like process or have like a good start to my day or early morning. But when I was having 5 and 6 cups of coffee by the end of my day, all full of caffeine, and then I can't sleep at night, then that's translating to other poor habits throughout the day. That also affects your eating. When you have poor sleep, you probably also have poor eating habits, or structurally it kind of just has like a snowball effect. So energy drinks is definitely one of those things I would eliminate, and things with caffeine. Things that are fruit flavored or like naturally flavored things that don't actually have the actual fruit or the actual component. I feel like staying away from like concentrated ingredients, because I feel like what they don't tell you is it could be concentrated with a certain amount of that product, but very, very trace amounts, so that you get like the taste, and then it has to be filled with everything else. So then you've got like these oils and emulsifiers and the process for actually creating these natural flavors that actually ends up being more harmful to you than if you would have just had blueberries on your waffle that you made versus I don't know, whatever brand blueberry waffles kind of thing. Like just put some fresh blueberries on there, get the fruit in. I think also just recognizing that there's a lot of entertainment on the front of packaging. So even when you're shopping, just because whatever you see on the front of the packaging sticks out to you, like sugar free, or if they're removing the sugar, then that means they have to add something else for the flavor. The same way as if they remove the fat, then it generally has more sugar. You have to look at the back of the ingredients of packaging. I feel like that definitely makes a difference. Actually know what's in it. And they're always going to list the ingredients based on what is in there primarily and what are the most harmful ingredients. And if you don't feel like going through the whole long list of stuff that you can't even read, if you look at the contains, that's always going to show you like the most allergy sensitive information. So that's going to tell you
What are those harmful
wheat,
things? Yeah. Oh, there you go.
if it has like wheat, nuts, soy, corn, milk, or eggs. Like those are the primary allergens. So just like knowing on the back, because you can see something. There's been plenty of times, especially one of my favorite places to shop is actually the grocery outlet. When you go to the grocery outlet and you'll see something that's, ooh, plant-based. And then like you look at it and then I have to go through the ingredients because that could just be one thing that's plant-based and it can still technically contain other ingredients that I would otherwise avoid, like milk. I try to just avoid having milk altogether, but it's in a lot of things. So sometimes it is hard to avoid even just being vegetarian. Or like I said, looking for things that are plant-based. It'll still have real cheese. It might be Impossible Meat or Beyond Meat, but it's using real cheese. So it's only plant-based because of the meat. So it's like you really have got to actually pay attention because they're trying to catch your eye because they know that it's catchy and it's also trendy. So I think when in doubt, really just educating yourself and reading the ingredients in the back of the packaging is like the safest route. And I think even as far as like navigating through like the holidays, sometimes you just know best for yourself. Bring it. I don't know. I'm that guy who's got a lunch pail, a backpack. I bring my favorite substitutes. So sometimes, so I don't leave myself no excuse. I feel like, I don't know, maybe certain individuals that are like really like disciplined, that like work out and meal plan, like sometimes like have that attitude, you know, like they bring their meals with them. Like I literally have a spice bag in my truck. Like I don't go anywhere without it. It has like my favorite things. So I can still create something out of nothing. And I think that kind of helps me too, even just navigating those spaces when people are like, oh, I only got tortillas, but I don't got whatever. And I'm just like, let me put something together.
Yeah. And speaking of that, like I've been on and off plant-based, but when I was like full, like very strict plant-based, more vegetarian, I guess pescatarian, but no, even that for a minute I was fully vegan, but I found it to be kind of expensive. And sometimes like I was still hungry. Like I would eat and still be hungry.
I feel like I run into that periodically. We all go through rough times, so you got to be on a budget. I feel like I have like certain staple foods or even just like ethnic and like cultural foods that I go to. Like for me, like grits, which is like hominy, is like one of like my favorite dishes. And like my grandmother used to always say, as long as you got a box of grits, like you can never go wrong. Like you'll never go hungry. But I've always kind of just like zhuzhed that up a little bit. Like I like a spicy, cheesy grits. I'll add a bunch of like seasoning and spices, but I'll also add mushrooms and veggies and like top that thing. So, I mean, there's people who have like shrimp and grits, and I don't know, no shade, but my cheesy grits and mushrooms is, you know, like y'all get the recipe to that, but you know, even still, it's just like that certain consistency. I don't know. Those are like some of my go-tos where I'm like, I can add whatever else to this little porridge that I can get at any liquor store, even for, you know, under $3. And I can make multiple different meals out of that. Rice and beans goes a long way. You can get versatile with it. I feel like when I prepare foods or whenever I have leftovers, the thing that also helped me was even just like combining things later on. I might have like a burger one day, it might be a taco, it might turn into a salad. Just being versatile with the way that I use the ingredients and really not confining myself or being so strict, I think sometimes. Like I know there's certain people who don't like to mix like fruits and vegetables, or like putting like fruit in a salad is like this egregious thing, or it's not alkaline, or it's not like Dr. Sebi's type practices. But I feel like for me, those things are winners. I can always add a bunch of things to a salad that, to me, it's not making it basic. And I feel like I'm keeping myself full by adding these other ingredients, like always making sure I have an avocado or like nuts and seeds. I guess some of those things over time can be expensive, but I feel like you can still access these things at a conscious level and be smart with where you're purchasing them. And I think even just that level of consistency, my primary shopping habits is the grocery outlet and the Berkeley Bowl. And I have that access, or otherwise like local farmers markets. Luckily, being in California, Northern California, we've got access to those things. But even when I'm in strange places, that's one of the first things I do when I arrive in a new space out of town, is go find my local grocery store or go navigate the local grocery store to be likely unimpressed, but generally just to try to navigate what that looks like and just try to find some of my favorite or like staple ingredients and just take the time to do that. To me, that's almost like a certain level of like wellness and self-care, but I genuinely enjoy doing those things. And just the comparisons, finding things in certain grocery stores, even location wise, demographically, or certain areas that you can't get elsewhere. I mean, sometimes that's sad to me. And I also recognize the privilege as far as like access, having a vehicle, having the education and the know-how that other people, maybe it's a lot harder to navigate that space. But I just feel like information is key. And there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah. And as for a last question, coming into the holidays with a new lifestyle change, because I know for sure I'm definitely wanting to go back plant-based. I did feel a lot better, but it was very hard to set my boundaries with family. So I was wondering, like, if you had any tips about setting boundaries with family during the holidays.
Honestly, I think it's just being open enough to have the conversation. I think you also have to be comfortable advocating for yourself. This is something that I'm like actively engaging in having conversations with, because my girlfriend's also Latina. So she's newly plant-based. So these are very much the conversations as we're like some of these traditional foods. And I think reintroducing things and just letting people know, like, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm not trying to not eat, but it's because I care for myself this way, and it makes me feel better that I'm making these decisions. But honestly, I feel like it's just easier for people to understand and accept when they can see it for themselves and when they can also try it. So it's one of those things where literally just leading by example. I can't say that it's easy, because it's really just not. I'd be lying if I said like, oh yeah, it's easy. Like, no, like most of the time, most families are really like resistant to it, or like, well, why would you want to do that? It's like, because I want to be here a long time. That's why, because it makes me feel better. And also just being like very like resolute in some of those decisions. And I feel like those conversations are hard, but I think having the hard conversations, I feel like, is really what plants the seed. Because if you just kind of like skirt over it and then you're like, let me just give in and let me just put the whipped cream on there anyway. It's just like, it makes it harder for other people to also buy in. And I'm not saying that you necessarily got to restrict yourself, but just understand how the choices that you're making affect you, and just allowing other people to kind of see that firsthand. When I first started being plant-based, like I said, one of the first things that I started noticing was just even just like the texture and just like my skin, just how my skin looked. And it's not as though I've had like bad skin, but it was still just like noticeably different. But I was just like, hey, like, I like the way that I look, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can't tell that I haven't had X amount of hours of sleep, where I feel like I could literally, you would see those things. I was wearing it on my face before. I don't know. It's not easy to have those conversations, but I think just knowing that you have to have them and just knowing that that's okay. And also understanding that, I don't know, similar with coming out, not everybody is going to be on board. Not everybody is also going to see that for themselves. And I think you also have to like respect that, but like kind of just like stay in your own lane. And like I said, really just be like your own advocate. Like you can still go and participate, but bring a dish or bring something that is compliments you or otherwise is something that you want to eat, or bring your whole meal. Like I full on have done that. I brought my own food just in case. I'm open to trying whatever things. And sometimes I think initially, even just having to pick around certain foods, I think is like the testing point. But yeah, I think just having them, more importantly, just having the conversation and why you're having it.
Nice. Thank you. I'm having like the conversations in my head as you're talking about it.
Yeah, my girlfriend's family is funny. They're always like, Mija, are you going to eat such and such for dinner? Oh, you're not going to eat it now. I was like, and she's just, no, I'll have it. She's just like, you just have to do X, Y, and Z. And it's like, they're slowly starting to accept it, or just otherwise they'll add more veggies and stuff because they know that I won't eat it.
Yeah.
And they're like, see, we made roasted veggies and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. They get very feeling like you're disrespecting them by not eating their food. And it makes it so hard.
Literally. But I just started even just like buying like certain groceries and things. And I like literally like leave it at their house. And they're like, wait. And her mom's an Aries, so she like picks up on everything. So she's like, what's this? What's that? What is this? And there's like, is this C's? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, it's butter. Use it. I'm like, it's the same thing. It's fine.
So on this season, we're asking everyone if you could describe radical acceptance and self-care in one word, phrase, or mantra, what would it be?
For me, it's sometimes doing things that are unpopular or misunderstood for your own greater good. And I don't even mean for that to rhyme, but it does.
The poet, naturally.
You have to do what makes sense for you. And I feel like I haven't always done things that other people have agreed with, or maybe the suggested, I don't know, the road less traveled. But I feel like really just like knowing what that means for you and really just standing strong in that. I've always been a person who's felt like if I was going to do something, I didn't want it to be based upon anybody else. So just making sure that I'm making those decisions for myself, by myself.
Love it. Whoop, there it is. Do you have any plugs or any shouts that you would like to make?
You go ahead and plug this pop mic, and I'll drop my promo code. If you like the pop mic and you like how I sound on this podcast, go and get you one. So far, I like it. It's easy, convenient.
Yeah, you sound
I think the
great.
sound quality is nice.
Yeah. So what is this promo code?
So it's actually a referral link. So I'll make sure that everybody has that so that they can get their 10% off the pop mic, because I promise you it's worth it. It's easy and it's portable.
Oh, yeah. We'll throw those in the show notes.
Other than that, I'm going to shout out my babies, Tika and Prince, and my new love. I appreciate her for putting up with me. So those are my shouts out to my peoples.
So how can people reach you to get some more of these coaching tips? Because this is great.
You can tap in with me anytime on Instagram. THA, the plant-based savage is the easiest way. And then email csavagechambers@gmail.com. You can reach out to me. And I'm looking to start building my plant-based community. I've got like a Slack community ready to go for people to get tapped in and engage and have more of these one-on-one conversations or group settings with other like-minded individuals, just kind of based on where you're at in your journey. So I'm here to help. See a need, fill a need. I'm your guy.
Yay, we like that. Thank you for coming on and sharing all this wonderful information, because I sure needed that. And
Right.
especially with these holidays coming up, it's so hard to say no to some things, especially being Latin, tamales.
For sure.
I'm drooling, but also like, no.
It's just as the nostalgia, just thinking of it.
Wowee. Gut health. So much valuable information. Now I get it when they say follow your gut, because your gut literally tells you when to get it together. You just gotta listen to it. And I had no idea all this stuff, and now all my belly stuff, I'm like, oh, I hear you down there. I hope you all enjoyed this episode and got some valuable information, because I sure did. Thank you again, Mr. C. Savage Chambers. I like saying Mr. before your name, by the way, when you listen to this episode. It's just so nice. Mr. C. Savage Chambers. Thank you again for being so wonderful and popping on here with us. It was really fun and a lot of useful information. I hear you, Belly. I hear you. We'll talk later. All right, queer kittens. We'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. Later, y'all. Love you. We have so much more to explore and share with you on the pod. Tap that follow or subscribe button to get every episode as soon as it's released. And give us a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And join our wellness community on Instagram at Quest Wellness Pod. This podcast was produced in collaboration by Kinoko Chocolates and Puka Puka Creative. Executive producer, Stevie Kwa. Producer, editor, and sound designer, Leah Jackson. Associate producer, Rafaela Landestoy. Original music produced by Basque. His music is amazing. And we can't forget the emotional support by our fur babies, Frankie, Nugget, and Pukalani.